when you hear the word migrant or immigrant. And just write them on the Post-it note, and then you can just put them up here on the board, and we're going to use those later on in our discussion. Also, as the prayer that we read, there is a little prayer card for everyone on the table for you to take home. So please make sure you stick that in your pocket or purse or whatever you have. Also on the table is a sheet that has a link to the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops letter that we are going to be referencing throughout the evening. It is the 25th anniversary of the writing of that letter, and it's quite a document that's filled with lots of information, and we will only be referring to parts of it. So if you would like to learn more, please take one of those with you, and you can look it up and check it out. And when you came in, if you did not sign up on the sign-in sheet, I would really appreciate it if you would do so on your way out. It's strictly for the purposes of feedback from you guys as to how the evening goes. And also, we are going to have some takeaways, and so we may ask you if that's something that you chose to participate in or not. But one last thing. I'm sure there will be lots of questions that come up during the evening. We are going to ask that you hold your questions till the end. And when we ask for, an open question and answer session. It's not always easy, at least for me, to remember what I thought of 25 minutes ago. So there are also pads of paper. They're not pads of paper. I did not hand those out. I will come around and hand those out. And so you can have those to jot down your notes and have those for when you want to ask your questions. I am now going to turn the mic over to Gabriella.
The mastermind in a lot of the facility logistics for this evening, along with Veronica and Enrique. So if on your way out, if you see any of them, please say thank you. This truly would not be possible without their help. Like Charlie mentioned, my name is Gabriella. I am a new-ish parishioner here at St. Teresa's, originally from Massachusetts, and moved to Houston to be a part of the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, where I worked with YMCA International Services as a non-detained asylum coordinator, which means that all of my clients had crossed the US-Mexico border within 1 year and were now seeking legal asylum. After my year of service, I stayed on with the YMCA, and so I'm currently still working with people seeking asylum, but I'm currently working with people in detention. Like Charlene had mentioned, this evening is going to be centered around the United States Council of Catholic Bishops and the Mexican Conference of Bishops joint letter called Strangers No Longer, Together on the Journey of Hope. This letter was written in January of 2003, and sadly, we have not seen much positive policy change that has resulted in people seeking asylum being safe and welcomed in our communities. What we're not here to do tonight is tell you to support a specific political party or a specific law. We have people from all political parties and all schools of thought that think all sorts of ways on immigration, but what we hope that tonight gives you is the ability to reframe thinking about immigration, not as a political issue, but as a humanitarian one. Regardless of where people were born, they are also made in the image and likeness of God, and that is what we hope to do with this evening. While I am qualified in theory to speak about legal actions and legal recourse, I was born a white woman in the United States of America with US citizenship, which means that I have no idea what it is like to be someone who has fled their country, who is seeking asylum. Walter, however, is a man from Honduras who stayed in a shelter in Mexico run by the Kino Border Initiative when he and his family were attempting to enter the United States to seek asylum. I invite you all to watch this 5.5-minute video with an open mind and an open heart. It is in Spanish. It is captioned in English on the bottom so that we can hear from someone who is experiencing migration in their own words what their current experience is like. Walter's story, unfortunately, is all too common for so many people who are attempting to seek asylum in the United States. The details might be different, but that genuine feeling of loss of homeland and the searching for safety is mirrored on the face of every one of my clients. And I am sure, as the panelists tonight will tell you, mirrored on the faces of many of their clients as well. One of the reasons that we asked you all to write down words that come to mind when you think of migration is because the Kino Border Initiative staff asked this same question to people who were currently waiting in Mexico for permission to enter the United States and seek asylum. We encourage you at the end of the night to come up and read some of the words that are on this board. I will say, on a personal note, the words that are on this board give me a lot of hope for the mentality of the people sitting in the room tonight. But on this screen right now are words that people who are migrating are using to describe themselves. I'm going to pause for a moment to let you all take this in. As we move into the more technical aspects of this evening, I hope and pray that you keep Walter and words like this in mind, because while we are talking about policies and jobs, these people are living it as a reality. I'm going to transition into my much more legal work mode and do a brief introduction on what does it mean to seek asylum. As Charlene had mentioned, there is a sheet on your table that talks about definitions of a variety of things, because as all immigration practitioners can tell you, immigration is complicated. It is one of the most technical aspects of United States and international law, and the words that we use matter. Someone seeking asylum has entered the United States and fled their country on account of persecution that either their government was doing or a group was doing and their government was unable or unwilling to control that group. Think of paramilitaries, gangs, etc. The reason that someone was being harmed matters when it comes to seeking asylum. In order to win asylum in the United States, you must prove that you have been persecuted on account of at least one of 5 protected grounds. Those grounds are race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or because you are a member of a particular social group, which is a fancy and technical way of saying that there is a characteristic about you or your past that you are unable or unwilling to change that is distinct and recognizable in the community. And for that reason, people are trying to hurt you and hurt you badly. Some examples of particular social groups include members of the LGBT community, lawyers, journalists, people who are part of a famous activist family, or people who have serious physical or mental illnesses. Asylum is incredibly difficult to win in the United States. And part of that is a factor of law. The other part of it is that someone seeking asylum must detail in extreme amounts the most terrible things that they have lived in a language that is not their own. All documents that are submitted with an asylum application need to be accompanied with a translation in English, which means that if someone doesn't speak English, they need to find someone who is able to translate for them. So, like Charlene mentioned, we'll take questions at the end. We know that this is a lot of information to start you off with, but we do think that it's important to lay the groundwork for what asylum is and who people seeking asylum are before our panelists speak about the work that they do with asylum seekers in our community. So now I will now pass it over back to Charlene and to Larry to introduce our panelists and moderate this evening's discussion.
Now to welcome our esteemed panel. These individuals are a group of heavy hitters here in Houston, and their individual resumes are quite extensive. So in my introduction, you're only going to hear a snippet of what they do, the boards they serve on, the accolades that they have received, and I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they will speak, so there's no hierarchy here. Firstly, Cesar Espinoza is going to speak to us. He is a proud immigrant from Mexico, and he arrived in the U.S. in 1991 at the age of 5. He is a DACA recipient, and Mr. Espinoza is the co-founder and current executive director of FIEL. Please excuse my terrible Spanish. Familias Inmigrantes y Estudiantes en la Lucha, Immigrant Families and Students in the Fight, which is the largest immigrant-led civil rights organization in Texas. He serves on a variety of boards at the local, state, and national level. Mr. Espinoza is an advocate for immigration rights, student rights, and human rights. Gordon Kwan has been practicing U.S. immigration and nationality law for over 40 years. He's a founding member and former chair of the immigration section of the State Bar of Texas. Mr. Kwan was selected by Texas Lawyer magazine for its Lifetime Achievement Award. He is the managing partner and co-founder of the Kwan Law Group, specializing in immigration law. And Mr. Kwan has a weekly radio program on immigration law in which he answers callers' questions. Gordon. Maria Mitchell is the managing attorney at Catholic Charity's St. Francis Cabrini Center for Immigrant Legal Assistance. During her tenure, she has supervised numerous programs for unaccompanied children and refugee minors, as well as being pro bono coordinator for the Cabrini Center. Ms. Mitchell has also acted as liaison between the Cabrini Center and the Executive Office for Immigration Review, the DHS Office of Chief Counsel, and the Office of Refugees Resettlement. Ms. Mitchell has extensive experience representing unaccompanied children in many and varied proceedings. Maria. And Dr. Dawn McCarty is professor and director of the UHD Bachelor of Social Work program. Since 2006, she's lived and conducted research on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border, studying contributing factors and outcomes of unauthorized migration to the U.S. Currently, her work and research are focused on the conditions and experiences of migrant persons now living in Houston. In addition to her work at UHD, Dr. McCarty lives part-time in community as a Catholic worker at Casa Juan Diego, where she works directly with Houston's asylum-seeking, refugee, and new arrival communities. Welcoming our esteemed panel. Now, I'd like to turn this over to my co-chair on St. Teresa's Social Justice and Action Ministry team. He has quite the resume himself, spending his life's work in servant leadership, and he is going to be moderating the panel discussion tonight. Mr. Larry Payne.
Good evening, everyone. Actually, I'm going to be the timekeeper tonight. Gabriella is going to do the hard lifting of the monitoring the panel. Let me just start off by saying a few words about why we're here, and then I'm going to turn it over to her and do the panel presentations. We did this wonderful 101 thing on social justice recently here at St. Teresa, toward the end of last year. I think many of you in this room were there. Some of you in the room were present. It was the beginning of looking at how we as church respond to issues of social justice. How we as Catholic Christians hold up those things we believe very deeply in our heart about what do we think, what do we feel, and therefore how do we act and behave when it comes to a myriad of issues that deal with equity, inequality, inclusion, and all those things that we talk about, an opportunity for all. Immigration is a continuation of that kind of look at what do we mean when we talk about these issues, particularly from our rich Catholic perspective. We are probably, without a doubt, the one institution in the whole world, quite frankly, that is on the most solid ground when we talk about the care and concern for other human beings. It is our tradition, it is our history, it is our doctrine, it is our creed, it is our pastoral letters, it is every pope from the beginning of time that talks about humanity and the dignity of the human person. So what do we hope to gain by doing this evening and hopefully doing the follow-up that will follow this evening's presentation? Whenever you talk about faith and policy, you're talking about human beings who have a different perspective on the world. The subtitle for this evening could be Immigration in an Age of Different Realities and Non-Shared Common Vision. Because every human being, perspective, opinion, and viewpoint, they feel is right, and they feel very strongly about those perspective, opinions, and viewpoint. That's okay. But the truth and the fact of the matters are different. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion, perspective, and viewpoint, but not their own fact and not their own truth. The truth is the truth. And Scripture guides us in the truth. History and tradition of the church guides us in the truth. It is our rock. It is our salvation. It is our going back to whenever we're in doubt of what should we be doing as Catholic Christians about this issue or any issue. What do I think? What do I feel? What action behaviors am I called to perform based on what I say, I think, and believe and feel? The cognitive, affective, behavioral parts of my being. What am I called to do when I meditate, reflect, and pray on an issue? How do I understand the depth of what I'm being called to respond to as a Catholic, as a Christian? So the issues really are about reflection and ethical leadership, mutual respect, moral reflection, increased understanding, honest conversation, productive discourse, constructive collaboration. Those are the issues we're talking about. No more, no less than the full dignity of each human being created by God. And do we see and understand in the face of our brothers and sisters, truly, truly, I say unto you, whatever you did for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did for me. Because in each one of those faces, I exist. I am that person. So all we're talking about is kindness, love, compassion. All those things we talk about every weekend in church. Everything we pray about when we pray. So this is no different. This is just talking about the humanity of each of God's given creatures as human beings, the essence of human beingness afforded to every person. That's it. This is not complicated, it's not brain surgery, it's not anything overly deep and profound. It is who we are and who we profess to be every single weekend in the church across the aisle. Simple as that. I'll turn it back over to you.
So up on the screen behind each of the panelists, you will see quotes from the 2003 letter, Strangers No Longer, Together on the Journey of Hope. It will sort of frame the 5 to 7 minutes each panelist will have, more or less.
I'm going to say it again, 5 to 7 minutes. And when we come to the table discussion, there's also 5 to 7 minutes. She gets to be the good cop this evening, I get to be the bad cop, so let's
So to kick us off for the evening, talking about community organizing around asylum rights is Mr. Espinosa. The denial of asylum adjudication rights is an especially acute problem along the United States-Mexico border. Employing a U.S. policy known as expedited removal, U.S. immigration officers routinely detain and deport migrants without giving them a hearing before an immigration judge. Denying access to asylum procedures, making them complicated, or not providing clear information about them in languages that people can understand is a grave injustice and violates the spirit of international law and commitments made by both of our countries.
So good evening, my name is Cesar Espinosa and I'm Executive Director of FIEL. And before I get started, I wanted to lay some groundwork as to who I am and why I'm so passionate about what I do. I am a first-generation immigrant from Mexico City, Mexico. My parents brought me here when I was this much old and about this tall. Still pretty wide, it's a lot shorter back then. And when I was brought here, I wasn't really given the choice of whether I wanted to come or not. It was just like, pick up your toys, pack your bag, we're going to this new place, like 2 days from now. And so, for me, it was just kind of coming here. I was very blessed to come here to Houston, Texas, even though my family moved for one awkward year to Ohio, but we didn't really talk about that. Came right back here to Houston, did all my school here. I'm a proud product of HISD, went to Houston Community College, went to U of H, and began my life work when I was a senior at DeBakey High School. And I got accepted into all these Ivy League schools, and I missed one question on my SAT, which I still am very upset about. But I got into all these schools, and then at 18 years old, I was faced with my first real break barrier, which is you can go to school, but we don't know how we're going to pay for it. And there were some schools that would even say, I don't know if you can go to school here, because I don't know if we'll get in trouble for having you go to school here. So all in all, I began to organize mostly around with dreamer young immigrant students, and then eventually over the last 15 years we've grown into organizing now around civil rights and several issues, and just helping out the entirety of the immigrant community in itself. And in these last 15 years I've learned some things. I'm glad this is a 7-hour talk, because
you're right.
Oh, okay, no, 7 minutes. Because immigration, the only way I can explain it really, like if I had to explain it to my 4-year-old, is immigration is an iceberg. What we see in the news, what we see, what we talk about, what we hear about, what we see here on the radio, is just a tip. And at the end of the day, there's so much behind, or so much under, when it comes to policy, when it comes to economic systems, when it comes to reasons, push and pull factors on why people migrate, and when it comes to who at the end pays the price of that, right? And what we've come to realize in the last 15 years, and what we've known most of our lives, is that at the end of the day, those who suffer the most are the immigrants or the asylum seekers that are coming themselves. Because they're victimized on a variety of levels. Number one is people don't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to take this trek, I'm going to go to the US, and without really knowing what's going to happen. And it is a very dangerous trek. About 87% of women who make that trek suffer some sort of sexual violence as they're trying to come here to the US. once you get here, or on the way here, people are told so many things from as soon as you get there, you're going to get a green card, you're going to get a car, you're going to get a cell phone, this and that. And sometimes people believe that out of ignorance and out of desperation, because where we are coming from, it's not, we don't have access to sometimes even basic electricity or food or clean water. Once they get here, one of the things that happens at the border is that folks are automatically, if they turn themselves over to immigration, then they are, sometimes they're given a credible fear interview, which they have to convince this officer, but at the end of the day, it's just an officer as to why they have a credible fear to stay here. And one of the things that we always find a problem with this, or one of the problems that we find with the system, is that immigration is tough, and Mr. Kwan, who's an attorney, has been an amazing attorney, knows that immigration is, even now, I'm sure he gets cases that stump him, that stump us in terms of like, what do we do in this case? So in many of these cases, these officers are not trained, and they're definitely not qualified to figure out at the border when they have thousands of people waiting in line as to how they're supposed to adjudicate these cases, or if they're supposed to adjudicate them. The other thing is that what sometimes people fail to realize is that when people follow these procedures, they're actually following U.S. law, or at the way the law is written, saying that people can present themselves at the border, saying that they can be allowed to enter the U.S. if they have an asylum claim, and that is the law. So sometimes when people say, oh, well, folks are following the law, yeah, on paper, they are following the law. It's just, if we want to change the law, if we want to see this law changed, then we have to work to get it changed. And then once folks, if they did make it through the track, if they did pass their credible fear interview, then we have the court systems that are here. And a lot of the times folks are expected to present themselves in court. We had a case about 3 years ago where, because of an immigration mix-up, a family of four, the oldest daughter, the middle daughter, and the mom were given an extension or a court date, but because of a mix-up, their 8-year-old daughter was deported in absentia, meaning that they never checked her in. And she had a deportation order that she was supposed to leave back to El Salvador, while her mom and her sister were supposed to fight their case here. So unfortunately, it's not clean cut. And when I do say that it'll probably take hours, days, weeks, semesters long to kind of decipher all these things, I really mean it. And I'm glad that these spaces open so we can start those conversations, and so you yourself can see the complexity of this, and more importantly, talk about solutions. Just lastly, real quickly, I'll tell you how complex my life is in the immigration, because my life is complex in other parts. But on the immigration front, I've been here since I was 5 years old. I went to school here, I graduated here, I did everything by the book, I have a clean record. Because of family reunification law, the only people that can petition for me right now are my brother and my mom, who are U.S. citizens. I am part of a mixed status family, meaning that some folks in my family are undocumented, some folks are documented. I currently have DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that was announced in 2012. If my brother were to petition for me right now, because I am a Mexican national, it would take about 22 years for immigration to get to my application. And then because I have been here illegally after I turned 18 and accrued unlawful status, then I can face a 2 to 10 year bar from coming back. So in a perfect world, I can come back in 32 years. Right now I'm 37 years old, so I could potentially come back when I'm 69 years old, even though I've lived here my entire life. And with my mom, it's about the same timeline. So for some of us, there is no other option but to wait or to work for reform, so that way we can change the laws for our better and for the better of folks that are coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Theresa. This wasn't your only opportunity to share some of your thoughts. To introduce the two of our lawyers that are on the panel, committee pulled the following quote. The church should encourage those broad-based efforts to provide both a comprehensive network of social services and advocacy for migrant families. Another important resource these communities can offer migrants, especially those seeking asylum or family reunification, is affordable or free legal assistance. A special call is issued to lawyers in both of our countries to assist individuals and families in navigating the arduous immigration process and to defend the human rights of migrants, especially those in detention. Parishes should work together to provide adequate services throughout the community, making every effort to invite parishioners with special expertise, lawyers, doctors, social workers, to assist generously wherever they can. Once apprehended, migrants often are held in unsanitary and crowded prisons, jails, and detention centers in Mexico and the United States, sometimes along serious criminal offenders. Migrants without documentation should not be treated as criminals, should be detained for the least amount of time possible, and should have access to the necessary medical, legal, and spiritual services. Asylum seekers who pass an initial credible fear interview should be released. And we are now going to hear from Gordon about the legal side of working with adults seeking asylum.
I want to stand up. Thank you, Gabriel. You know, I was a teacher before I became a lawyer, and I like standing up and addressing the crowd. So, you know, as we talk about asylum, you know, I have this radio program was alluded to, and I got a caller the other day and says, hey, what don't people understand about illegal? Illegal is illegal. If you break the law, you break the law. Why can't people do things legally? You know, so I want to take a few minutes to talk about what are the options people have besides asylum. And immigration law, while it's complicated, it's kind of divided into 3 different or 4 different avenues. Cesar talked about relative petitions, and that's one. Another is employment, and then there's humanitarian concerns where asylum comes in. So I want to just illustrate real quickly, and I have my associate Henry here, and to show this is how a person may immigrate to the United States, okay? And as Cesar said, if your brother sponsors you, you may be looking at 20 to 30 years before you're able to ever come up. If you try to do employment, there's all these obstacles in that way too. If you look at even if you had $1 million and said, oh, I want to invest in America, let me get my green card that way. You're probably looking at like 7 years before you're ever going to get a full green card, if ever. So this is the maze that people are looking at when they're trying to come to America. And so, you know, I want you to understand it's not a choice that people want to make. I mean, I think they'd rather hire me and pay a legal fee than a coyote to go across the Sonora Desert to try to sneak into the country. But it is almost impossible for most people to go through this route. So I say that because I want you to have a little compassion to what choices people have made. You know, Harry Truman, when he signed, actually he vetoed the 1952 immigration bill because he said, this is the most racist bill I've ever seen. And the history of immigration to the United States has been one of racism. Prior to 1882, you could immigrate, anybody could come. Open borders, no problem. But then, you know, those pesky Chinese came, and they spoke a different language, they looked a little different, they actually worked too hard. And so we had to get rid of them. So we had the first exclusion law. And since then, it was the Japanese after that, then it was the Irish, it was different groups, group after group. We don't want these people, they're not American. We are only limiting ourselves to certain people who look like us, think like us, talk like us. That's who America is. It wasn't until 1976 under Jimmy Carter that we had an immigration bill that said, you know, we should treat all people in the world the same. We should have equal quotas for everybody. You know, now you look at it and say, well, that's an easy idea, kind of, you know? But it wasn't. It was like revolutionary. So instead of China with 105 people who could immigrate annually, they suddenly had equal quota with England and France and other countries. And that's how you see this diversity that we have here in this country now. And people are still moving to try to look for that dream in the United States. Now you may say, well, God, how many people can we take in? I mean, you're asking too much of us. There's over 100 million people who are displaced in the world today. The United States is not even among the top 10 countries taking in migrants at this point. Turkey's taking in 3 million. Germany's taking in millions. Canada. So we think we're like generous people, you know, we're like taking in. Our quota under this map is 140,000 workers, and 226,000 family members. Then there's immediate relatives who are married to U.S. citizens and other groups. We average about almost 1 million people a year. But that's a fairly small amount compared to other countries. And so people have had to, they didn't qualify as relatives, they didn't get a job. Their only avenue is seeking asylum to the United States. And so some people look at it and say, hey, isn't that like a gimmick? Are they really seeking asylum? Is this just some sneaky way for people to get in the country? Well, the United States signed an act, an international act in 1980 that said, we abide by these principles as a country, that we will accept people who, as Gabriella defined, are outside of their home country, who fear persecution because of their race, their religion, their nationality, their political opinion, or membership in a social group, and we'll give them an opportunity to present their case. A lot of people are not getting that opportunity today. You see in the newspaper this chapter 42, which says, because of health, we don't want to even take your application, go back to Mexico and wait. We're just saying as Christians, we believe in the equality of mankind, and that we should be looking at giving everybody a fair hearing, at least. You know, yeah, the law is the law, and until they change the law, this is what we have. And that law also includes asylum and refugees. And so we should be advocating for that. I know a lot of you may not be lawyers, and you may say, well, that's great for lawyers. And we have a workshop coming up at the University of Houston next Friday on asylum if you want to learn about it. From 12 o'clock to I think 3 o'clock. It's free of charge. We have judges teaching about it, lawyers teaching about it. But if you don't, you say, well, I'm not a lawyer, that's not my deal. There's so many organizations in town who do great work. Catholic Charities amongst them. They have more lawyers actually than any other organization in town doing immigration work. And Casa Juan Diego here that Don works with, I'm so proud of our church here, of donating food on a regular basis and taking on Casa Juan Diego as one of our projects. So we can help in so many different ways, whether it be a lawyer, as an advocate, whether it be supporting organizations that do this work, or helping the individuals themselves. So I really want to save the rest of my time for discussion later on, but I hope you understand the plight that people are at. They don't want to necessarily seek asylum, but they don't have any options.
Something else that's just important for us to keep in mind when we talk about legal services is that in immigration court, there is no such thing as a public defender. So when you are in immigration court, you do not have a guaranteed right to a lawyer unless you can pay for one or you can find a lawyer to represent you for free. So again, we take some of the most complicated law, domestically and internationally, and we take away someone's right to have a lawyer, which it has been proven statistically that across the country, someone who has a lawyer is 5 times more likely to win their case for asylum. That does not mean that their claim is 5 times better than the person sitting next to them. That means that they have access to someone who knows the law and can speak legalese, which is why work like Gordon's and Maria's and Henry's and the other immigration lawyers in the room is so important. In addition, the U.S. record of handling undocumented, unaccompanied minors from Mexico and other countries is shameful. Mexican children and children from other countries intercepted along the US border often are placed in dilapidated detention facilities for days at a time until they can be repatriated. Children from Mexico and other countries in Central America often are not given the option to contact an attorney, guardian, or relative, or to file for asylum. These practices must stop. Because of their heightened vulnerability, unaccompanied minors require special consideration and care. And now we will hear from a lawyer who works with unaccompanied minors, Marie Mitchell.
Thank you. So my ministry at Catholic Church has been exclusively working with unaccompanied children. That is not a call that I chose, that was a call that was given to me by Jesus. When I went to law school, I wanted to help migrant workers. I work with them, migrant workers who work on the field, and I help them understand workers' compensation and their legal rights. I realized that I spoke Spanish, that was great. I could read them the code, but I could not give them legal advice. So that was my inspiration to decide to go to law school. I'm not a native speaker of English, so it was very difficult. Law school was terrible for me, but I managed. And I never worked with the people who work in the farms as an attorney. I work with their children. I work with the children that they left behind and that they eventually called to come and join them. So the United States has had a history of treatment of unaccompanied children. Prior to the 1980s, the US admitted about 33,000 unaccompanied children, mostly from Europe, Asia, Cuba, and some other programs. In the 80s, the majority of the kids were coming from Central America because there were civil wars in Central America. Then in the 90s, the largest percentage of unaccompanied children were from Mexico, and the Mexican kids are returned at the border, okay? And then the government has even a term other than Mexicans, OTMs. Those are the kids from Central America or other countries. And in the 2000s, from like 2003 up to now, the majority of the children that are entered the country unaccompanied are from Central America. So prior to 2003, the custody and care of the unaccompanied children was on the Immigration and Naturalization Services, the INS. And then in 2003, the government reorganized the INS, and now it's the Department of Homeland Security. And within that act that they had in March of 2003, basically they turned over the custody and care of the children to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is under the Secretary of Human Health Services. It's the same people that do the health insurance. And there were a lot of allegations of mistreatment on their INS because there were the people that were detaining them and they were prosecuting them, so it was pretty dysfunctional. So there were lawsuits, of course. And to this day, the lawsuit that controls everything that happens to the unaccompanied children is a case by the last name of Flores. And then it's Flores versus whoever is the Attorney General. So it has changed names over time. It's kind of like the Queen of England and then all the different people. Right? So it's Flores states. So it's from 1997, and you probably heard about this Flores Agreement of 1997 during the shameful separation of families that occurred in the prior administration. So under this agreement, there's a lot of regulations, and then fast forward to 2008, the TVPRA, the Trafficking Victim Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008. It was signed on December 24 by President Bush, right before he went probably on Christmas break. And that actually controls, regulates a lot of the treatment of the unaccompanied children. So the Flores Agreement is a policy that sets a nationwide policy about how the U.S. is going to treat the minors. But as you probably heard, during the separation, the family separation, and the kids that were separated from their parents, there were a lot of allegations about the mistreatment of the children in custody at customs and also at other shelters, and every once in a while you hear about it. In 2001, the Office of Inspector General issued a report that was just really shameful about how the U.S. was treating children. So because of the TVPRA, the kids are now in the care of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. They are in shelters. we have a term. It used to be the unaccompanied alien children, but now is the unaccompanied children. So the word alien was removed. And an unaccompanied child is defined as someone who has no lawful immigration status in the U.S., is under the age of 18, and at the time that customs encountered them, or the authorities, they don't have a parent or legal guardian in the U.S. available to provide for them. Then they are moved to a shelter. At the shelter, the case managers there help them identify relatives in the United States, and then they do a background check. That's something that we do at Catholic Charities. We help them fill out the paperwork, and they give them forms in English that they have to complete, and they have to show that there is a relationship with this child and that they're not gonna endanger the well-being of the kids. So they take fingerprints in some situations, and the child is reunified with them. The purpose is so that the kids stay the least amount of time at the shelter. Once they're reunified, they have to go to an immigration judge. They are given a packet of tons of information in English, and they are told, you need to call about your case, you need to figure out how to go to court, and you can hire an attorney. So we do legal orientations at the office in Spanish and in many languages. We actually have access to interpreters. So the programs that I oversee are legal access programs, right? And they're under the humanitarian umbrella. And so we do orientations. We do 6 orientations every week for the sponsors of the unaccompanied children. And we also do individual orientations where we answer their specific questions. We train them how to call the 800 number or how to go online and find out when their court status is. But the language is a barrier, definitely. The system will say there is no information about your case. So people can understand all kinds of things about that. They can say, oh, nothing's gonna happen to me. There's no case, I'm good. Or they can say, so what's gonna happen to me? Am I gonna be in limbo? So we explain to them, now if you hear that, that just means that you have not been scheduled, but you will be scheduled eventually. We have people that report to us that they have been waiting for 2 years and there's no court date for them. And they think that they're okay, that somebody forgot. As a Mexican, I grew up in Mexico, I'm an immigrant myself. I grew up knowing that the US is like an elephant. So I always say to people, you know how I learned that the US is like an elephant. Elephants never forget anything. So they're not gonna forget about your case, keep on checking. And eventually they will get a court date. Don't miss the court because they'll order you removed in absentia. When they're in the shelters, they have services. They have services to education, healthcare, recreation, vocational training, mental health, and access to lawyers. So at Catholic Church, we have a huge team that goes to shelters in the Houston area, provides Know Your Rights presentations, and they do intakes with the kids, and we also refer them to legal services providers, not just here in Houston, but if their destination is outside of Houston, we also have a huge network of legal service providers in the country, and we make referrals so that when they arrive to the country, to the state where they're going, the city, they connect with that attorney and they continue with the case. The purpose is that they do not miss their court date, that they go talk to a judge. We also train them how to request an interpreter in their language. Many people are so kind, they really don't want to trouble anyone, they don't want to cause any fuss. And they're okay, especially the people from Guatemala. No, I'm okay understanding Spanish. And it's like, no, this is very complicated. You must do your hearing in a language that is best for you, and the immigration court will pay for the interpreter. No matter how obscure the interpreter is, they will find someone to communicate. This is a very important situation. Their life is on the line, and they need to have that opportunity to express their situation in their language and also tell the interpreter if they don't understand. The numbers have fluctuated over the years. The program from, let's see, when it first opened, in the first 9 years of the program, they serve about 410,000 unaccompanied children. And then since 2012, they have served like 13,000. And then in the last fiscal year, 2021, the Homeland Security referred for care to ORR, to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, 122,731 kids. These are all unaccompanied children, anywhere from months old to 18. So it's a huge number. And then numbers in Houston, they have fluctuated. I look at the last fiscal years from 2019 to 2021. And in 2019, it was 5,429 unaccompanied children that were reunified with a sponsor in the greater Houston area, so Brazoria, Fort Bend, Galveston, Harris, and Montgomery. 2020 was 1,162, so remember what happened there? And then it went up again, 21, 7,052. And then in up to August of 2022 is 8,186. So what can we do as a community? Pope Francis actually gave us a recipe. We accompany the people and we advocate for them. How do we accompany? There's many ways. You can help. You're not a lawyer, but there's many ways. People need to know how to go to the court, how to take an elevator, how to find their name on the roster, how to give their A number to the clerk, so that how to understand how much time they have to wait. If they get hungry, where do they go buy something to eat while they're waiting? The hearings take a very long time. About 54 people get scheduled for the 8:30 docket, and they have to wait the whole morning. And many times they think, like I used to think, my time is at 8:30, so I'll be there and I'll be back at 9. They can be there until noon or many times until the afternoon. So there's many other ways, so you can contact Catholic Charities, help us out. We'll be happy to guide you and help you listen to the mandate or the call from Pope Francis to accompany and advocate for immigrants, and particularly the children are exceedingly in a vulnerable situation.
Thank you, Maria.
So like Maria had mentioned, we have seen a lot of honestly positive movement in policies that better honor the dignity of children, which shows me that it is possible to change our policies to honor dignity of people. Their policy process, but on their process of how to live as everyday individuals in the United States. The Catholic bishops of the United States and Mexico, in communion with the Holy Father in his 1995 World Migration Day message, affirm that in the Church, no one is a stranger, and the Church is not foreign to anyone, anywhere. As a sacrament of unity and thus a sign and a binding force for the whole human race, the Church is the place where illegal immigrants are also recognized and accepted as brothers and sisters. It is the task of the various dioceses actively to ensure that these people, who are obliged to live outside the safety net of civil society, may find a sense of brotherhood in the Christian community. Solidarity means taking responsibility for those in trouble. The Church must, therefore, welcome all persons, regardless of race, culture, language, and nation, with joy, charity, and hope. It must do so with special care for those who find themselves, regardless of motive, in situations of poverty, marginalization, and exclusion.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much, and thank you for your patience and your concentration and your attention. I'm a teacher, so I'm always concerned that you gotta hang on to folks as long as you can. So thank you so much. You've been wonderful. So it's been lovely to be here. I haven't seen Cesar for a long time. I've worked with him when he was a student, and it's lovely to be here, and to old friends of Casa Juan Diego, long-term friends of Casa Juan Diego. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do, sort of big picture, and then some of the details, and make sure that you know that you are welcome to come to Casa Juan Diego. We talked earlier, to do some work, you have to have some special skill maybe or interest. That's works against you at Casa Juan Diego. Please do not come with some kind of skill. No, I'm joking. We are open and eager to have every person come, and there's no end to the work that you can do. And some of it is complex and complicated. We're following cases, we're coordinating with attorneys, we're doing a lot of complicated work around asylum processes, and we have a lot of languages going on. We've got volunteers speaking a lot of different languages and trying to figure out things for folks, and so we're in that constant process. At Casa Juan Diego, we have this really great opportunity to what I call, we get to model the world that we want to see. we get to model the kingdom of heaven. That's what we try to do every day. We live in community. We take a vow to be as close to people, particularly migrants. We serve the migrant community. I'll talk about that in just a moment. To be as close as we can, to take on as much of their struggle and burden as we can, to be in solidarity with them, literally and figuratively. And we do it in a way that conveys value, that we have equal value, and that we value the other person. And that is life-giving and life-sustaining. And so it's a beautiful process. It's hard work, it's difficult, it's challenging. We have 2 Catholic work, our full-time staff here with us, Wade. And so they're tired, as you can tell. So if you get a chance this evening, talk to them or get their contact information. They're just so lovely. And so Casa Juan Diego started in about 1981 right here in this parish. So Mark and Louise Zwick were lay missionaries or doing lay work here. They had been in Central America. They had been in El Salvador and had to leave when the Civil War started. They were forced to leave. It was a very dangerous time for Catholic lay priests, for the entire church, for the entire country. And so they went to Guatemala, and then they came back and they found themselves in Houston working here doing missionary work. And at the time, there were just people flooding into Houston from particularly El Salvador, fleeing the war, sleeping all over the place. This did not used to be this kind of fancy neighborhood. And so towards downtown. So Mark knew Dorothy Day and knew about the Catholic worker movement, and his mother knew Dorothy Day very well. And so they just decided to open a house and start housing migrants coming from Central America and El Salvador. So since then, we have, I lost track, 8 or 9 houses. We have some sick and injured men's houses. We have what I call the worker men's houses, the big, which Peter is running with anywhere from 60 to 80 people a night, men coming through. So we were really very responsive to the border. We try very hard to make sure that we're open to people in that most vulnerable place, right across the border or right out of detention. We want to be able to take people out of detention. And then we have a women and children's house. So, and on top of that, we serve the larger community of Houston. And so we may talk to, I don't know, Marjorie, how many people do you think you talk to a day? Make a stab at it. 50. Okay, exactly. So there's a lot, we have a lot of things in motion. We do a lot of work with 2 health clinics. And so Peter is going to medical school, Marjorie's a nurse, and so they are also working our clinic. And so there's a lot going on. So we see healthcare issues, we see immigration issues, policy issues, child care, parenting issues, lots of trauma, constant response to trauma, and then trying to get folks where they can be settled. So a lot of moving people around the country, getting them to family and helping them get the best opportunity they can to settle, to heal, and to sustain themselves while they try to work this ridiculous process, or not, or if they just, it doesn't work for them and they try to survive. So that's what we do. We give out food to about 1,000 people a week. So we have a huge food distribution to the larger community in addition to the other supports that we give. And we're a resource and a refuge for so many people. Over the last 20, 30, 40 years now, folks who couldn't get through this process, right, are here. They're working, they're building, they're contributing to your community, but they're working dangerous jobs. They don't get adequate health care. They're sicker, they're injured before they should be. And so we at Casa Juan Diego respond to that. We help take care of about 250 families that one of the family members fell off a roof and broke their neck, or didn't get compensation, doing unsafe jobs, had a heat stroke. Every hot summer, those terrible things happen. A young man fell off a tree hanging Christmas lights in River Oaks and broke his neck. So we help support those families, and so that is also a wonderful part of the work that we do, but also it's very painful in a sense of understanding how vulnerable people are that are here, that have been here 20 and 30 years still doing the work and the hard labor and not getting the compensation. It's not just a legal issue, it's a moral issue. And so we have the opportunity to do what we can for those families as well, and to care for them, and to be in solidarity with them. Come on down. We are very open door in terms of volunteer. Lots of folks say, where do I apply, or how do you have an application? And we're like, no, we should go. And so anyway, we'd love to see you, and you're welcome to contact me for any reason.
Thank you so much. So, what you have seen and what you have heard is an example of the moral ethical dilemma in front of us as Catholics and as Christians. Charity is the manifestation of not having justice. Charity is needed. Charity is reactionary. Charity is downstream. Charity is humanity and care and concern for human beings. Justice, on the other hand, is proactive. It is upstream. It is talking about eradication and systemic change. It is talking about policy issues so that you don't have to keep doing the same things you do around charity because you've solved some of the problems at the start. The old analogy is the bodies come floating down the river. We as Catholic Christians take the bodies out of the river, wrap them in swaddling clothes, give them a burial, and we keep doing that year after year, week after week, month after month. Our children then take our place on the banks of the river doing the same thing. Their children and grandchildren take their place and do the same thing because that's what we're called to do from a charity perspective. But until we look at the justice aspect, we will continue to have to do the same thing, save the same people, try to accommodate the same numbers day after day, month after month. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. You have to have charity, but you have to also focus on the justice issues. That's what we're trying to highlight this evening, that humanity is a moral, ethical issue of dealing with human beings, the essence of God's creations as fully human beings, and what we can do to help that situation. And we're going to talk about some follow-up things, what you can do. Those of you who may be interested in a deeper dive, we'll do a follow-up to this evening. But we wanted to really just put it out there so you could be clearly focused on the issue, on the dilemma, on the challenges, on the policy, on the things that we need to be focused on if we truly say we care as church, as people, as Catholics, as Christians.
Thanks so much, lady. Before we talk a little bit about ways that you all can get involved, we promised some time for Q&A, and we know that we threw a lot at you tonight. And like Cesar had mentioned, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So we only have about 10 minutes for questions, and we know we're not going to answer all of your questions this evening. I'm planning on sticking around for a little bit after this event, and I'm sure some of our panelists would be open to that as well if you're not comfortable asking the question in a larger group. But we do want to take the opportunity to pause and open for any general questions you all might have. Larry will moderate, I will run a mic.
General questions, that deep, yearning question that's on your mind and your heart and soul that you got to get out.
So, as of, the last couple of years, there's been a big push with the caravans being shown in the media. First question is, how long, this is just curiosity, how long have there been caravans? Is this like a new phenomenon, or has this always been happening? And then really, what would be the right terminology to use with family and friends that make it seem as if it's brute forcing their way into the country versus safety, migration, stuff like that? Like, what would be the key terms to use to kind of use objective truth to kind of talk about the situation.
Which one of you want to take that? I had a feeling you would.
So in terms of the caravan aspect of it, it has been ongoing for decades, except that it wasn't really pointed out until recently, until there needed to be another visual to that. And when we talk about visuals too, is I always, whenever I talk to younger people, I always ask them, what do you think? We do this same exercise but with younger people, but we ask them, what do you think about when you think about immigration? And they always say the people jumping the fence, right? When in reality, the majority of people staying here are staying here on overstayed visas. When the majority of people are here are working, going to school, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all about the visuals, right? Now, when we talk to physical people, to actual people who have been part of caravans, who have been, they talk about that safety aspect of it. Of like, if I come by myself, I might get lost, or I might not be able to make it, because we talk about the border here. But we don't talk about the trek that people have to go through Mexico with the cartels, et cetera, et cetera. We don't talk about the other borders that they have to go through. So it is a very complex thing. The other thing too, earlier when I talked about is that the people that are most vulnerable are the immigrants, because then there's also bad actors that are making a ton of money. Cartels and maras, like the gangs in El Salvador and Central America, are making a ton of money bringing people over and organizing them in that regard. And we haven't even talked about a lot of the things that happen once people get here. Once people get here, a lot of these same groups of organized crimes take their documents away, and now they say, even though I told you were going to pay me $6,000, now it's actually $16,000, and the only way you can pay it off is if you basically are my slave. So when we talked about the tip of the iceberg, that tonight is the tip of the iceberg, because there's so many issues that stem and that people take advantage of because of our broken immigration system.
Thank you. Saw a hand in the back.
Sorry, I'm gonna,
Go
real
ahead.
quick, in terms of more welcoming language, I think that is
Go ahead.
such a good question,
Second part.
because it's how our words matter and the way we talk about things matter. Words that I've tried to eliminate from my own vocabulary, alien, for I would hope obvious reasons, illegal. Someone can be doing an illegal activity, but no one is illegal. So I think those are kind of the two biggest ones, and words that I have swapped to like use in my vocabulary are all person first focused, like people who are migrating, people who have crossed the border. Because regardless of what someone believes on a political level, as long as we are continuously emphasizing someone's humanity, it like truly does change the conversation.
And this is one of those true things, if you change the narrative, you change the outcome. If you can change the narrative, you can change the outcome. I think we saw a hand in the back first, and I'll come back up here. I see one in the back. What I did? No. All right, brother. Oh, wait, let's take her quickly, and then we'll come back to you. Yes, ma'am.
I believe that Mr. Kwan, they said you have a radio show? Where and when can we access that?
It's fabulous. It's fabulous. You learn so much.
Here, Mark.
No, I think I have a lot of voice. So thank you very much for asking that question. It's on 90.1 KPFT, Tuesday nights from 6 to 7. What it is there's so much bad information about immigration, and you don't know who to turn to, and sometimes people just kind of give you a half an answer to try to get you to come in and pay fees.
Yeah.
So we wanted to have a safe place where people could call in, ask questions, get answers. We don't try to solicit business. We've been doing this for like 13 years on the radio. So
I did hear 90.1 and 6 to 7 p.m., but what day of the week?
Tuesday nights, I'm
thank
sorry.
you.
Do you podcast still?
It's AM.
We should podcast, but we haven't gotten there yet.
It's a great show. It's a great show.
Thank you for asking.
All right. Quickly, brother.
We had discussion at the table, and one of the group questions was, what happens to the minors if you can't find a sponsor or a family that wants to take them in? If that makes any sense. One of the people in the group
We'll let
wanted to know what
the
happens.
expert talk about that. Let me tell you real quickly about how Casa Juan Diego does. I'm on the Houston board, advisory board for the Young Center, and the Young Center is the group that actually has the legal authority to represent unaccompanied minors. And so, but at Casa Juan Diego, what we do is, if the child is going to turn 18 and they don't have a place for them to go, and then we will take them. That sometimes they'll let us take them, and so if they, because what happens when they turn 18 is they could go into an adult facility on their 18th birthday, which is a tragedy. And so, so there's like a big push to stop that.
Yes. So many of the kids, if they're not 18, they continue their immigration process, the removal proceeding process, while in care. The government, the Office of Refugee Resettlement tries to move them to kind of type of foster care programs, smaller environments, less restrictive, and so that they can continue attending their immigration court, seeing their lawyer, and pursuing their legal relief in whatever visa they may have. If they turn 18, things can turn pretty bad, especially if we don't have groups like Casa Juan Diego. And now I'll talk to you about a witness that we have, a testimony, or a witness about something that our church is amazing, and our God is an awesome God. And He knows when He sends us the people, and we have to be open to hear that call and put our faith into action. And I think our Catholic social teaching guides what we do in terms of immigration. So the bishops say, people have a right to migrate and to seek a better life, to be safe. But they also say in the principles of Catholic social teaching that countries have a right to regulate their borders, but they must do it with justice and mercy. So what I invite you to meditate upon, to really reflect after this talk, our current policies for a very long time have not been with justice and mercy at the front. And the bishops, that's what they're pushing. Right? How do you talk to your friends or your family when they say, oh, you're just a radical crazy person, you just want to have the upward? It's really meditating and reflecting. Is our current policy one with justice and mercy? Are we regulating our borders that way? And the answer is no. At Catholic Charities and as part of the Archdiocese, we did have a situation many years ago, and it was at Casa Juan Diego. We had a young lady, and that young lady came really to show us the way. She crossed the border, they did a medical examination of the border, found out that she was pregnant, and they also found out that she had terminal cancer. She was placed in Houston at a shelter. Our team of lawyers went and met her, told her how wonderful our immigration law is, and they also talked to her and put her in touch with social workers. Eventually the girl decided that she wanted to carry the pregnancy to term and with her child in adoption. We found lawyers, not only for immigration, but also for probate, to make plans for her child after she was going to die. She knew that. She also decided to be confirmed. So a priest from Annunciation helped her with RCIA, and she received the sacramental confirmation while she was in the hospital. She delivered her child. They were going to do a C-section, but when they were going to do the C-section, the doctors found out that the cancer was actually in front of the baby, so they couldn't do that. So she delivered in the natural form. The child was put for adoption, but she was over 18, and she couldn't stay at the shelter. She was at Casa Juan Diego. And then we sponsored one of their relatives to come and say goodbye to her from her home country. And Casa Juan Diego also hosted the relative for a time. That child passed away, and then an army of people, and honestly, I don't know how, it was just really by the grace of God, came to the rescue. We got a donation for a plot of land at a cemetery, a Catholic cemetery he's in Houston. Somebody donated a funeral service. I don't even know who those people are. We just got close. The church in Clear Lake, St. Clair of Assisi, had just gotten a donation of food for a funeral in case we needed food. So we took the food. And St. Bernadette also hosted the event, the wake, if you will, the lunch after that. We went to the funeral, we went to the cemetery, we went to a funeral. It was at St. Cecilia, since the priest at St. Cecilia hosted the mass. So think about the distances that I'm talking about. We were at San Cecilia's, we were at St. Bernadette, we were in Dickinson, we were at Clear Lake, St. Clair. And all these was people of faith helping us to do this work. And when we arrived at the cemetery, they welcomed us to this beautiful area that was set up with flowers and a canopy, and it was beautiful. So we did a service and some random guy appeared. I don't know that was a random guy. He did a quick service and they were gonna lower the casket, but the family didn't want to leave. So we left, and then the family left, came back later, and it was really late. So we figured what happened. We said, oh, they were gonna lower it to the wrong place. And Maria, have you had seen the place where we were supposed to be? It was like a humble hole on the wall, on the background. So that's where she is. But for me, that is an example of our call and answering our call and putting our faith in action. So I just wanted to put something in your minds about that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that story.
I just want to add something real quick. The children's detention centers are all over the place. There's actually one on Emancipation right down the street from Minute Maid Park. And it's called a shelter, but it's more of a detention center because kids aren't able to like leave and come back whenever they want to. The other thing is that there's been horror stories of people disappearing within the system or then not be found. But more importantly, I just want us to reflect on the fact that I have a 4-year-old, and if you like, if he's away from me for like more than one day, he starts panicking, right? He's like, "Where's Poppy? Where's Poppy? Where's Poppy?" So imagine the psychological impact that some of these kids are going to be having, the long-term effect that's going to be having when they're separated from their parents that they came in with, that are their parents, that could take care of them if they're separated for long terms. And so I just want us to reflect on that and think about that and think if that is justice, if that is right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that is actually a perfect transition into our final segment of the evening, which is, we've been talking a lot about what the problem is and what the system looks like. So we've done the so what, here's the now what. How are we each individually called to welcome like Jesus? Again, not a political question. A very, very human one and a very individual one. As you've heard from our panelists and from Larry, from myself and Charlene tonight, we all bring very different skill sets to the table, as I'm sure each of you do as well. So Sarah Shorter, who is also a part of this committee, is currently handing out a sheet of just some different ideas of things that you can do to expand your own knowledge on immigration or to donate your time. Especially if you are a dual language speaker, I can tell you right now, YMCA, Catholic Charities, Baker Ripley, Casa Juan Diego, all of these organizations are in desperate need of people who can simply do a translation. You do not need to be a lawyer or have any legal knowledge in order to do that. I think as we were planning this event, something that came up a lot was the concept of despair. It's really easy to look at immigration and only see impossible to solve problems. And something that I've been reflecting on a lot in prayer is the story of two people at the beach with beached starfish, so to say. And one of them is like walking on the beach and just throwing starfish back into the water to save them. And his friend comes up and says, like, what are you doing? There are thousands of starfish on this beach. Like, there's no way that you can save them all, so what are you doing? Like, you're not actually making a difference. And his friend stops, picks another starfish up off the beach, throws it into the ocean, looks back at his friend and said, well, it made a difference to that one. Regardless of what you choose to do moving forward, and regardless of the quantitative impact that that makes, I hope that you all are able to leave tonight knowing that one action for one person is enough. One smile, one conversation with a friend, one day volunteering at a legal clinic or passing out food at Casa Juan Diego. If everybody does a little bit, a lot gets done. So we invite you to turn back to your table and for the next 5 minutes, talk about some ways you personally, as an individual, feel called to welcome like Jesus in the context of immigration. We then ask that you write down those things on those sticky notes that are on your table and have one person from your table come up and bring those sticky notes and stick them on this poster board. And when that is done, Larry will close our evening in prayer, but we invite you to take the next 5 minutes to do that.
5 minutes.